Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Jacobs. Welcome to the Middle Adulthood lecture. There's some things that I'd like you to be able to do by the end of this unit. I'd like you to be able to describe middle adulthood developmental tasks. I'd like you to be able to explain physical changes related with midlife. I would like you to be able to discuss menopause and andropause. I'd like you to be able to explain changes in cognition. I'd also like you to be able to distinguish between different types of control beliefs. I would like you to be able to distinguish between crystallized and fluid intelligences and explain how they change across the lifespan. I'd also like you to be able to explain how generativity changes throughout the lifespan and how it influences memories. I'd like you to be able to describe socio-emotional selectivity theory. I'd like you to be able to explain and provide examples of selective optimization with compensation. I'd like you to be able to explain the big five and where you personally stand on each of the 5 traits. I'd like you to be able to describe different aspects that go into an optimal workplace. I'd like you to be able to describe the main marital pathway in Western civilizations. And that's what I would like you to be able to do by the end of this unit. Remember, make sure that you're using these unit learning objectives to create your own study guide each week. Those are the things that I want you to be able to do by the end of the unit. All right, so middle adulthood spans from age 40 up to 65 years old. This is actually the least studied developmental period. And so I think that's kind of interesting because they spent so much time studying childhood and adolescence and, late adulthood with gerontology and even emerging adulthood once that became its own thing. And then they're like, it's midlife. So there's some major midlife developmental tasks. For example, during midlife, this is when people start typically losing childhood caregivers. Of course, people can lose them earlier or even later, but this is when a majority of people will start losing their childhood caregivers. Another developmental task is if they choose to have kids. This is launching kids into their own lives. Adjusting to empty nest if there were kids in the home. Dealing with boomerang kids if they had kids at home. And becoming grandparents if that is something they chose to do, and then also preparing for late adulthood. I always find it really interesting that so much of the midlife developmental tasks that they connect to within the materials for this unit involves having children and launching them into their own lives. And we're seeing a significant portion of the population now choose not to have children. And so I just think it's a little bit outdated. And if not outdated yet, it'll be really interesting to see what happens, what these developmental tasks are once we start seeing a larger proportion of, especially the American population, not having children. And then also acting as caregivers for aging parents and spouses. All right, so we also find that there's a loss of muscle tissue during the stage. So sarcopenia is a loss of muscle tissue and function as we age. So once we get into mid-adulthood, we lose about 3 to 8% of muscle mass per decade. And then after age 60, this accelerates even more. Okay, so disease, this is going to be a really fun unit, let me tell you. All right, so then we have osteosarcopenia, which is muscle loss due to age. We have things like rheumatoid arthritis or RA. This is when antibodies attack the normal synovial fluid in joints, causing problems. We also have osteoporosis, and this is porous bones due to bone density loss, which can result in bone fractures. We also see problems with chronic inflammation. That's something that's becoming more and more common to study about, not just with aging, but with cancer and other things as well. We also have presbycusis. This is hearing loss related to aging. Often this is due to loss or damage of nerve hair cells inside the cochlea. And so this is where, I like to tell my students, make sure that you're wearing ear protection at concerts. So if you go to a lot of loud things, make sure you're bringing earplugs with you. A lot of people are really moving into this movement because in different cultures, we have a lot more hearing loss than other cultures. There's also really concerns about frequent use of headphones for younger generations and seeing how that's going to end up influencing people's hearing as they age. Okay, so presbycusis is also cultural dependent. So in cultures with a lot of white noise, hair dryers, construction equipment, cars, sirens, like all this noise, we tend to have hearing loss, whereas in other cultures that don't have as much of that type of noise, they actually don't see the same type of hearing loss. And so this is why it's really important to try to protect your ears if possible. So we also have otosclerosis, and this is a condition that's impacting the middle ear and its bone structure. So one bone in the middle ear, the staples, becomes rigid due to abnormal bone growth. And then it can't vibrate, which results in a hearing impairment. We also find a lot of weight gain, so AKA they call it the middle age spread. Men bodies tend to add weight to the upper abdomen and back, while women bodies tend to add fat to the waist and upper arms. A lot of times the metabolism slows by 1/3 during midlife. And there's also visceral fat. So people in women's bodies and in and post-menopause will often gain weight. A lot of times it'll redistribute to the stomach and is often visceral fat. This is fat that accumulates between the liver, intestines, and other organs. And this is more dangerous than subcutaneous fat that's just underneath the skin. So exercise. Fewer than half of people in middle adulthood exercise. Fewer than 20% do it frequently and strenuously enough to have real health benefits. Nutrition. As people age, they need fewer calories. Sometimes, though, these reductions in calories lead to vitamin and mineral deficiencies. And so they believe that diet plays a large role in body inflammation, which they're finding, or they believe has a lot of connection to different diseases and things. And then the climacteric is males have decreased ability to reproduce in middle adulthood, although that doesn't necessarily go all the way. Females lose the ability to reproduce once they hit menopause. Something that's also interesting is that 17% of new cases of AIDS are in people age 50 and older, which is something that people don't talk about a whole lot. We also have menopause, and this is an age-related process occurring around age 50, where ovulation and menstruation stop due to the decline of estrogen. But there's a bunch of different age ranges for this. So typical menopause can be anywhere from age 45 to 55. The mean age of menopause is 51. Early menopause is considered age 40 up to 45. Premature menopause is before 40 years old. Many times premature menopause is due to treatments for cancer or premature ovarian insufficiency or POI. So not only is there menopause, there's something called perimenopause. And menopause and andropause were two areas that I recently started learning more about because there's not a whole lot of information or materials the way that it should. And when I was asking people about these things, they said that people in women's bodies said they wish they would have learned about perimenopause, and they hadn't heard anything about that. And a lot of people in men's bodies told me that they wish people had told them that they had andropause. Like we hear a lot about menopause, but not andropause. So again, perimenopause is the time when a person's body starts moving toward menopause. You can find some symptoms of this. So irregular periods, hot flashes, decreasing bone density, increase in LDL cholesterol, having trouble sleeping. And then actual menopause is the absence of menstrual cycles for 12 months straight. Okay, so then andropause is a reduction in testosterone levels and sperm related to aging. Sometimes males will choose to take testosterone shots to increase testosterone when going through this. Working out can also increase testosterone levels. So if some people don't want to take shots, they can also choose to work out, which is going to have a whole lot of other health benefits as well. Cognition, we start finding cognitive decline occurring around age 60. And it just progresses throughout the end of the lifespan. We also have control beliefs. So we've examined this a little bit before, but it's something that we revisit again. We have locus of control, and this is who is responsible for success or failure. So if you have an internal locus of control, life outcomes are due to you. If you have an external locus of control, life outcomes are out of your control. Okay. We also had studied intelligence earlier in the semester, and the Cattell-Horn-Carroll, the CHC theory of intelligence, is the predominant theory of intelligence that we use today. And according to this theory, intelligence is made up of two major components. We have fluid intelligence, which is the ability to think abstractly, reason quickly, and problem solve independent of any previously acquired knowledge. Crystallized intelligence is what is accumulated across the lifespan. So fluid general ability shows more in tests requiring adaptation to new situations, where crystallized skills are of no particular advantage, so domain-specific knowledge. So with crystallized intelligence, it tends to increase until we start having issues with our memory. So typically we'll find that our vocabulary will increase as we age until our brains start to decline. We'll find that a lot of times our comprehension tends to increase until we start having trouble with our memory as well and our processing speed. Fluid intelligence then peaks in the 20s and then declines after that. So we also have tacit knowledge. So this is pragmatic knowledge learned through experience rather than direct instruction. And this is something that a lot of people in middle adulthood have a lot of, and it's why workers that are in middle adulthood are very advantageous for different companies and organizations, because they have this information that they've developed through experience in addition to their direct training that you only get from having years on the job. So we also have psychosocial stages. So we have generativity versus stagnation is our stage for this. If you remember, our theorist for the psychosocial stages is Erik Erikson. And so in this, generativity is primarily the concern in establishing and guiding the next generation. So for this, one major way that people show generativity versus stagnation is through having and raising their own children, or adopting children, or fostering children. But that's not the only ways that you can be generative. What are other ways that you could establish and guide the next generation, even if you don't have children of your own? One way is you could coach some sort of little league, or you could have some sort of scholarship fund, or something that gives back to the next generation. There's so many different ways to do that. And for this one, sorry, I keep going back and forth. I like to use a metaphor for this. And like a lot of times when I think of generativity, I think of growth. So the people are continuing to grow and give back. So like, you know, those fairy tales or Disney movies where we see like the flowers growing and blooming, and greenness is like growing and spreading across the world, and trees are budding and animals are playing. I think of that as generativity, while as I think of stagnation as that nasty stagnant pond that doesn't move and doesn't change and is just stuck in their way. And so the challenge during the psychosocial stage is to, you know, get established, help guide the next generation to make really good change for the world versus just being stuck in your way. So generative adults' memories often will have a commitment script, and this is often, they'll describe early memories of feeling like they were blessed. A lot of times we'll often find redemption sequences as well. So theme of highly generative adults' autobiographies in which they describe tragic events that actually turned out for the best. We also have information about the midlife crisis. This is a stage crisis view. I believe that significant change occurred between 40 and 45. And they saw this as a time for taking stock and recalibrating what was important in life. Something that's interesting about the study is that actually most people don't have a midlife crisis. In the study, the sample size was super small. It was never replicated. Originally, it only had men. Technically, his wife replicated it with people identified as being women as well. But like, there's really not a whole lot of evidence for a midlife crisis to begin with. We also have socio-emotional selectivity theory. So as time horizons shrink, people become increasingly selective and investing greater resources in emotionally meaningful goals and activities rather than wasting their time. And this emphasizes time perspective rather than chronological age. So once people start realizing that their time's limited and they're not going to live forever, a lot of times they start being more selective about how they invest their time. And that's really interesting because after 50 years old, we actually see an increase in subjective well-being. Even despite declining abilities and cognition, people are typically happier at this point in their life. We also have selective optimization with compensation. These are things that we do to start trying to cope with declining abilities, whether it's motor abilities, cognitive abilities, and so forth. And you can actually use some of these strategies for things like having ADHD as well. All right, so whenever we use the strategy, we'll first focus on a particular goal, which we call selection. Optimization then is we work hard to perform with the strengths to get that goal. And then compensation is that we'll use other strategies to compensate for weaknesses. And so, like, for example, I am so bad at remembering where my car is when I park. And so if I cannot remember, I will use other strategies to compensate. Either I'll use my clicker to set off my car horn, or if sometimes my phone doesn't always do it, but sometimes it'll let me know where I park and things like that. Other things that I could do is take pictures. So like if I know I'm going to be gone and parking at the airport for a week to go travel for work, and I come back, I'll actually take a picture of where my car is, like with by the little markers, and I'll take a picture of the pickup where the bus is, the shuttle is to get to the airport, so I know where to get off when I get back. Okay, so there's a personality activity within our materials. You'll want to go through and complete this for the Big Five to get an idea where you fall on each of the different personality traits. So you want to go ahead and probably pause me right now, go find that in our Blackboard materials, and then come back to me. All right, so the Big Five it's just one major personality theory. There are several personality theories. In fact, we have an entire class on personality theories that you can take. This one's the most commonly described in textbooks, and I'm not sure why. I think the Big Five and then maybe the Myers-Briggs are some of the most popular personality theories out there with personality tests associated with it. And there is a mnemonic that you can use to remember the Big Five, which is OCEAN. So the O in OCEAN stands for openness to experience, so trying new things. So either people are typically really open to trying new things, or they're really set in their way and rather just have the consistent routine. Conscientiousness is like the ability to pay attention to detail and be conscientious about getting work done and deadlines. We have E, which is extroversion. So typically we see this on a spectrum from extroversion to introversion. This is where you get your power. So for example, often I'm mistaken as an extrovert because I seem to be very outgoing, but these are actually just skills that I've developed. So technically I'm probably more of an omnivert, which is both, or an introvert, which means I actually get my power from being alone. But people can appear to be one or the other. It's where you get your power, where you feel recharged. Agreeableness, this is whether or not you agree with what people say, or if you're always in conflict with what people say. And then we have neuroticism, which is someone's propensity for mental illness or being erratic or volatile. All right, so the Big Five across the lifespan. We see some increases until middle age. So a lot of times people tend to increase their agreeableness until they get to middle age, and then they just don't care anymore. We also see conscientiousness typically increases with age, which probably makes sense because we see the development of the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning and time management, things like that. This is actually especially true in cultures that marry earlier. Subjective aging, this is someone's perceptions and evaluation of their own age. And a lot of times people will identify with a particular age group, which may not be their own. And then work satisfaction. The older we get, the more satisfaction we get from our work a lot of times. However, there's also increased dissatisfaction the longer one stayed in the same job. Work relationships, and y'all probably already know this, like the higher quality work relationships that you have, a lot of times the more likely that you're going to enjoy your job and be less stressed about it. So those are really important. relationships to foster. We also find different career rewards. We have intrinsic career rewards and extrinsic career rewards. So for example, for my job, an intrinsic career reward that I have for being a professor is that I get to help teach people new things, right? It's really fun to see students, especially in a class like statistics, where they come in and they don't think they can do it. And then by the end of the class, they're like, I can do this. I know what I'm doing. And that's really intrinsically rewarding for me to be able to experience that, or getting to watch students get into PhD programs or master's programs, or get a really good career that they wanted, or build the life that they want from taking the lessons that they've learned in my classes. Extrinsic career rewards then are things like getting paid money, right? They're not necessarily bad, but they're not necessarily the things that are fulfilling about a job. So it could be money, it could be benefits, it could be tuition reimbursement, it could be a retirement account. These are things that are extrinsically motivating, not stuff that are internally satisfying about a job, but are also important as you consider a career and what kind of life you want to live. So people in middle adulthood often have motivation to continue work. For example, growth and development. So having new challenges makes work interesting. Being able to gain recognition and power. Security is another reason. So having income and benefits, especially healthcare, is really important as people age. Generativity is also motivation for many people to continue working. So whether it's mentoring the next generation of other workers, or if you're in a field where you're constantly mentoring the next generation, that can be really motivation to work as well. We also talk about marital satisfaction. And so they have something called the U-shaped curve of marital satisfaction, where they say that marital satisfaction peaks at the honeymoon. And if they have kids, we find the steepest decline in marital satisfaction in the first few years. It steadily declines until the empty nest when the children launch into their own lives. And then it goes back up. Marital satisfaction slowly goes back up. There are some problems with this study, though. They used a cross-sectional research design and did not replicate it with longitudinal design. So they're unsure if this was just differences in the different generations that they sampled to examine this theory. And so the word's still out about that. There's different types of marriages that people have. There's a vitalized marriage, which is a very high relationship quality. We have a harmonious relationship, some areas of tension and disagreement, but still broad agreement on major issues. Traditional marriages, which this breaks my heart to hear, but it says less emphasis on emotional closeness, but still slightly above average. That sounds miserable. Conflicted marriages accomplish functional goals like parenting, but have a lot of interpersonal conflict. And then devitalized marriages, low across all areas, little interpersonal closeness, little agreement on family roles. So familial relationships, they consider it a sandwich generation, which was my parents' generation, where you're often taking care of children and aging parents at the same time. A lot of times people in mid-adulthood are responsible for kin keeping, which is just organizing events and communication in order to maintain family ties. A lot of times there'll be one main kin keeper within a family that makes sure that there's family events and things. So as people age, that people are still keeping it together. Abuse. Physical abuse is intentional use of physical force to cause harm. Sexual abuse is the act of forcing someone to participate in a sexual act against their will. Psychological abuse is one of the hard ones to define and recognize. But this is a pattern of behavior in which one person deliberately and repeatedly subjects another to non-physical acts that are detrimental to behavioral and effective functioning and overall mental well-being. So divorce is another major issue. This is the legal dissolution of marriage. Slightly less than 50% of marriages end in divorce. And once an individual has a divorce, we see increased divorce rates for each subsequent marriage. And so it's really hard because with this divorce rate, this is 50% of all marriages, not necessarily first-time marriages. It's a really tricky number to be able to calibrate, because some people will get married and divorced, 5 times, or some people will get married and never divorce, and then, or someone will get married to someone who's never been married before, but they've been married once or twice. So it's just a really hard statistic to figure out. So that's all we have for this week. Thank you for listening. Let me know if you have any questions.